And with that, I turn it over to Susan Jonas.
Hi. It is an untenable situation which should not be allowed to continue, particularly with the support of public funds. It is our hope that the leaders themselves will realize that an affirmative action program is vital to the health of the theater and its audiences. Discrimination not only damages lives and careers, but it debilitates the creative aspect of the theater itself. This is from Action for Women in Theater, a report on employment discrimination against women playwrights and directors, written in 1976. Here we are again. Here we still are. I have at home a big fat file of over 30 years of reports on the status of women in theater, many commissioned by the Women's Project. Because the reports use different methodologies, it's difficult to track progress with exactitude. But all these reports have two important things in common. The first is that they concretely demonstrate discrimination against women in theater. The second is that they were all written with the expectation that by demonstrating the discrimination against women, the attitudes and the behavior of people in the field would change. More on that later. In 2002, Suzanne Bennett and I co-wrote the report on the status of women in theater.
Hi.
Okay, that's okay. Based on a 3-year national study involving hundreds of practitioners, researchers, theorists, and scholars. This was under the aegis of the New York State Council on the Arts Theater Program, represented tonight by Robin Zuckerman. Our report was very detailed, but it was no exception to its predecessors. We were, again, not surprised to find that women were underrepresented. What we were surprised to find is how underrepresented they were. Dazzled by the high-profile successes of Wit, How I Learned to Drive, Art, Julie Taymor, Gary Hines, and Susan Stroman, we were all persuaded that there had been more substantial progress, but the absolute numbers had not changed. That's why we need to track statistics regularly and with consistent methodology to measure actual progress against perception and against specific goals. In over 3 decades, the percentage of women writers represented on nonprofit main stages had risen from 7% to 17%, and for women directors from 6% to 16%. On Broadway, the ratio for women directors rose from 7% in 1965 to 12.5% in 2007. In between, there were years that the ratio was 2% or 0. I don't have a comparative figure, but in 2007, the ratio for plays written by women produced on Broadway was 4% in 2007. If you include participation in creative teams, then it soars to 8%. At that glacial rate, it would take at least a century to approach parity, and that's too long to wait. The 2002 report also showed that the presence of women directors and playwrights was inversely proportionate to the resources, which means that the theaters with the highest budgets, whether they were run by women or by men, hired the fewest women directors and playwrights, with rare exception. And that's still true. It's important to note that there are still very few women running the top tier of financially of theater, so they really can't be considered the gatekeepers. The hiring of women directors and playwrights increased at mid-sized institutions, and it was greatest at the smallest institutions with the least resources. And that's still true. The presence of women artistic directors was also highest at the lowest tier, not of quality, but of resources. And that's still true. Historically, when women become frustrated by a lack of access, they start their own companies, creating opportunities for themselves and for other women. But the downside is, because they operate mostly outside of the mainstream, they have little chance to actually change the mainstream. The other downside is that most of those theaters, those small theaters, if they survive, remain for a variety of reasons that have nothing to do with quality, undercapitalized, understaffed, and underfunded. The point is, the presence and employment of women playwrights and directors is primarily attributable to the initiative of women producers. It has always been women who have championed women, with a little help from our male friends. And if you take a quick look around the room, you'll get a sense of what the rough ratio might be. Women champion women's legal rights, as well as their right to express themselves in public. both in politics and in theater, which are historically linked. In fact, women in theater were among the most influential activists in the pursuit of suffrage, here and in England. Men have historically considered the greatest feminine virtues to be silence and absence from the public sphere. And that remains disastrously true today in a lot of other cultures. Meanwhile, women have fought to be seen and heard through theater. After all, the first known dramatist since antiquity was a woman, Roswitha de Gandersheim, a German canoness whose name means strong voice. The ways in which women have advocated for women and have created presence are represented by our panelists. They've produced plays by women, diverse women. They've published contemporary and classic plays by women, making it suddenly possible to teach the 11th century long canon of neglected works to the next generation of theater artists. They've brought plays by women to the attention of a wide readership through reviews. They've taught the real history of women in theater, how women have shaped the American theater as we know it. And they've restored that legacy through biography, studies, textbooks, and oral history. It's a real joy to see my students, some of whom are here tonight, have that aha moment when they say, Elizabeth Inchbald? I've never heard of her. Margaret Webster, Cicely Hamilton? Why haven't I heard of these women? Why can't I find their plays? Why doesn't anyone produce them? And then many of them go on to use the material for their auditions and then to produce the work themselves. Unfortunately, my aha moment came a decade after getting my doctorate, and in response to the first 100 years of the female playwright. Each anthology, biography, production, televised interview has exponential impact on changing the expectation we have of women theater artists and the expectation that we have of ourselves. We can't stand on the shoulders of giants unless we know who they are.